So to celebrate my 100 subs or my 0.1k subs, I'm probably never getting it to 1,000 subs. So this is the video I'm going to make to celebrate the number of people who have found my videos interesting enough that they've subscribed. So what I've decided to do is I've decided to talk about board games. A lot of board gamers like to talk about their top 100 games. It's a bit of a thing on the internet, and so I'm going to do that. Now, to get started, I'm going to talk about board game complexity. I like to use the skiing symbols for board games. So green is the easiest, double black is the hardest. Green circles, I can teach them pretty much as we go. If you're over the age of 8, maybe 10, I can teach it to pretty much anyone, and the game isn't going to go for too long. A blue square, you're going to need to pay attention for 10 minutes, and the game will probably be somewhere between an hour, maybe an hour and a half. A black diamond will take over 30 minutes to teach, and it'll probably take over 2 hours to play. And then there are double black diamonds, which you really don't get the rules until you've lost your first game. Now, there's also a whole bunch of board game mechanics. So these are the different there's terminologies for the different ways that people play board games and the systems that they involve. I'm not going to, some of these are pretty obvious, like cooperative means you work together against the game. Some of these are not so obvious. So Eurogame just means that it's a game where people are trying to collect points, and there's usually no direct aggression against each other. It usually involves wooden cubes. And then there's things like rondelles. That's a term that we really only use kind of in board games. And pick up and deliver, simultaneous action selection, sometimes called program movement. We're going to get to these as I'm going to go on. So I don't spend a whole lot of time explaining what these mechanics mean. You can go to the website boardgamegeek.com, which has explanations for all of these things. Boardgamegeek.com is like the IMDb of board games, and it's very influential in the world of board games. And then if you like the sound of one of these games and you want to find out more, well, if you know me, you can ask me, and you can ask in the comments, I guess. But the place where I learn about board games is through the Dice Tower. And if I really want to learn the rules to a game, I go to Watch It Played. And the thing that I really value is short rules. So that's why I like 3-minute board games. Okay, so with that explanation, let's get started on our first board game, which is Catan. Catan was the first board game I ever played. Well, first modern board game. I don't really count things like Monopoly, but that's just because I don't really think there's a lot of strategy in games like Monopoly or Trouble. Catan, I first bought as an app, and then I played it at a friend. We had a weekend away, and a friend brought it along, and I just loved it. I loved the trading. I liked the city building, the route building. And these, I can see that it has a real place in board gaming history, and I think that for a lot of people, you can still get a lot of value out of Catan. For me, I have moved on from Catan. If there are trading games that I'd rather play, but I can definitely understand why other people like it, and it's pretty easy to teach. If I have to play a game with 52 standard playing cards, then I would play cribbage. I've played a lot of poker in my time. I don't think that that's a very interesting game. there's a lot of downtime. I think cribbage is a pretty has enough strategy to make it interesting. Okay, Villainous is a very popular and successful game where you play as Disney villains, and you also kind of play as the Disney heroes as well. And in this game, it's very, very thematic. You will feel like you're Ursula or Maleficent or Jafar, or these days there's also Marvel villains as well. If you like this sort of game, it also has a lot of interaction. You're always trying to beat down your opponent. But if you like this sort of thing, I would suggest looking at Commander or EDH, and you could look at websites like Game Nights by the Command Zone. The problem, and for the first 10 games on this list, they're not really games that I would look to play. I'd play them if someone else wanted to, but the top 10, sorry, the games in the 90s, I don't play all that often. And the problem for me is a lot of the time, black diamonds and blue squares, they're hard for me to get played because they're too complicated to teach to new people. And if I'm playing with my friends, we'll want to play something heavier. So in 97, I have Star Wars Rebellion and War of the Ring. I think these two games are pretty similar, so they share a spot. If you like Star Wars, then Rebellion is Star Wars in a box. It's a long game, it's a complicated game, and I found that I was often getting rules wrong, and after even 3 plays. The first time I played, I had a great time. I really felt like it was the game of Star Wars. And then every other time I found that it just felt a bit repetitive. That said, there are people who love this game, and I think that there's many people who will enjoy this. If you like the sound of that, except with Lord of the Rings, then War of the Ring is the same thing. Innovation is, I think, maybe 110 or so cards, and about that, and it is an incredibly deep civilization building game. In the top 10, I have another civilization building game where you sort of build up your empire. This one is done very, very abstractly. It's just a whole bunch of icons. It can be pretty mean. If you want to play this game, check out Isotropic. That's a website. Archipelago is a semi-co-op game. So it's a worker placement, which we'll talk about more later. But semi-co-op means that everyone wants to win, but if you don't take care to keep everyone happy, everyone can lose. And in the case of this game, a lot of semi-co-op games will have a traitor who is actually trying to get everyone to lose. And if they lose, that person wins instead. Magic Maze is a cooperative game that's silent. So everyone has to move these pieces around a board, and they can only do limited actions. And you have to just be paying attention to what's going on. And this, with all co-op games, there can be a problem where people can get frustrated that other people aren't playing as well as they would like. And that's definitely a problem for Magic Maze, but there are lots and lots of people who really like this game. Hare and Tortoise, which was more recently printed as Around the World in 80 Days, but I think both games are out of print. Hare and Tortoise is originally from the 70s. It's a racing game for people who like mathematics. Yeah, I don't own it, but I would definitely play it. A friend of mine has it. Transatlantic is a newer version of the much, much more popular game and successful game Concordia. I don't really like Concordia that much, so if I had to play one of the two, I would play Transatlantic. It has action retrieval, which I think is a really interesting mechanic, and I don't know if I have any other games on that list. We'll see how we go. But I really like that mechanic. Telestrations is like the game Telephone, or it was called Chinese Whispers when I was a kid. The idea is that you have a drawing that you're supposed to draw, you draw it badly, and then you pass it to the person next to you. They then try to guess what your picture is, and they write that down, and then they pass it to the next person. And by the time it's gone around 10 people, the picture that you're going to get is going to be a pretty crazy picture, which is usually pretty funny. I've played this at school sometimes. These days, I don't really take games to school as much, but this is a good game for classrooms. Libertalia is, I think it also has the action retrieval mechanic, but I haven't played Libertalia in a long time. It has action queue, which means that you're going to choose your card, and then we're going to, when we all reveal our cards, we're going to madness is going to happen. It's a lot of people don't like this game because of the fact that there's a lot of madness. But yeah, I think it's fun as long as you don't take it too seriously. And I think that if you are a better player, you have a good chance of winning. Pirate's Den is a simpler game that I think feels kind of similar. Patchwork is a bit of a meme on the internet. It's a great game for couples, for two people. What you're going to do is you're going to lay out a whole bunch of Tetris-shaped tiles, which are going to be the patches that go on your quilt. And there's mobile app. I've played a fair bit of Patchwork online on the mobile app, but there's what I call the two-player problem, which is that two-player games, the person that you play with, if I play with Lily, we're going to play the two-player game that we like the most, and all the other two-player games kind of get left behind. And the first game, the highest ranked game on this list is a two-player game, so it has knocked a lot of other games out. Okay, Archaeology is a set collection game that's pretty easy to teach. Fantasy Realms is a newer game that also has a much more complicated, and it's probably a blue square set collection game. I really liked it, but I don't feel the need to own either of these games. Mombasa is a heavy Euro game. So I mentioned Euro games earlier. I only own one heavy Euro game, and Mombasa is not it. I do think that there's some really interesting strategy, but there's just a few things I don't like about it, and that's where I only have one heavy Euro game, because if it's my turn to choose the heavy Euro game, I'm going to play the number 2 game on this list. Captain Sonar is a team versus team real-time strategy game. So each team is going to have different roles on a submarine. There's going to be a captain, there's going to be a navigator, there's going to be the radio transmitter, there's going to be the weapons, there's the engineer. And if you know 8 people who want to play a team versus team game, then this is a pretty interesting choice. I have another game that I think feels very similar, which Space Cadets Dice Duel, which is further up on this list. Skull or Welcome to the Dungeon are 2 games that have push your luck and bluffing. I like Skull because it's a game that can be played with drink coasters. So if I just want to play a game and I don't have anything with me, it's something that I can make with just 5 coasters per person. You draw a cross on the back of one of them. That's it. You're good to go. On the other hand, I think Welcome to the Dungeon, it just looks nicer. I think it's easier to explain to people, and that I own Welcome to the Dungeon, not Skull. Blood Bowl Team Manager is a game that I haven't really played enough to really have a strong recommendation for. It's a forced commitment game, and I'm going to talk about another one of those later, where you have to assign you can't play all of your players in every game because they're going to get hurt. So you have to choose which game you want to put your best players on. And over time, your team is going to get better and better, and that's done through deck building. So deck building is a very common board game mechanic where you're given a set of usually cards, and what you're going to do is you're going to use those cards to buy better cards as the game goes on. Reef is a very pretty game that has these big chunky plastic pieces that represent coral growing, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to grow or play your coral pieces in a way that you can match these patterns that you're going to get gold cards. And I like this game, but I'd rather play Century, which is further down on the list. I have 3 Reiner Knizia cards at 82, Reiner Knizia games at 82. A friend of mine is a huge fan of Reiner Knizia, so I played a lot of his games, and a lot of them are on iPad, the mobile versions of these games. I think Lost Cities is great, but it doesn't play very well in person. I think Samurai is pretty good, but I haven't played it enough recently. Ra, which is a bit of a meme for me when I talk about Reaction A in class, is probably the best of these games, and is one of the few auction games that I like. Hanamikoji, which is also sold in other names, I think mostly in China, is another forced commitment game. It's a great 2-player game. It can go a little long against two evenly matched competitors, but I think it's a great game that only needs about 20 or so cards. A Study in Emerald is a very thematic game. It really feels like the story A Study in Emerald by Neil Gaiman, which I think is an excellent short story. I think there's an audiobook that you can easily find on the internet, and worth checking out. I haven't played it very much, and I'd like to play it more. Isle of Skye is a game, it looks a little bit like Carcassonne, where you have these domino sort of tiles. But in this game, you're going to set the price of the tiles, and you're going to try and guess what other people really need and set a price that's high, but just not too high, because if it's too high, you have to pay for it. Dale of Merchants is a deck builder. I've got it here as a racing deck builder. I really should have changed that. It's what I mean by racing is that the game ends suddenly. So you have to balance between trying to go for a really big finish and trying to be faster at ending the game than your opponent. So I like those sorts of games, and I think Dale of Merchants is a pretty interesting game. I've only ever played it on online on Tabletop Simulator. I have 2 games that I bought for my niece and nephew. Zombie Kids is a legacy cooperative game, so the game is going to grow with you. I'm going to talk about another one of those later. And Magic Labyrinth, they represent invisible walls in this labyrinth by using magnets, which I really like Magic Labyrinth. I wouldn't play it as an adult, but I'm always happy to play it when kids come over. Tokaido is a time track game. There are a couple of games like that, but I really only like it for the story. I think if you're not willing to try and embrace the story and explain why your character is going to a shrine, or why they're going to the onsen, or why they're painting that picture, then I think you're missing out, and it's the game's probably not worth it. For party games, I would recommend Just One, but that's a cooperative game, and there isn't really a winner, it's just an activity. Whereas if you want a team versus team party game, then Codenames is pretty popular for good reason. Century is another game that has that sudden ending. So you have to, what we call an engine builder. An engine builder means that you're going to play stuff that's going to make your cards get faster and faster, and you're going to get more and more powerful as the game goes on. But the fact that it ends really quickly means that you have to balance what you're doing. Friday the 13th, you don't want to play. There's 3 different suits, and you don't want to. You want to make sure that you always have a card so that you're not playing more than the 13th card or the 13th value on any of those suits. Because if you do, you're going to pick up all those cards, and it's kind of like a golf score. So you want to have as few points as possible. Scopa is a traditional Italian game. I think it's a great game for if you just want to have an activity that doesn't require a lot of thought. That said, there's only 40 cards, so you can really get good. You can card count and that sort of stuff. Oceanus is a good... It takes a little bit of time to explain, but I think it's a good beginner game. I don't own it because I own Dream Home instead. But if you like the idea of submarines, then this is a game worth checking out. Imperial 2030 is a game where you represent a rich family that is buying and selling countries to start wars to make money. That's not a theme that's going to appeal to everyone, but I kind of like share games, and I like games that use... This is another Matt Gertz game. This uses a rondel, and I just find that makes for interesting decisions, and I think they play quickly, and we have other games like this on the list. Guillotine is, it feels a lot like Magic the Gathering for me, but without a lot of, it's much easier to teach. Not everyone's going to like the idea of lining up nobles to guillotine them, but if you're okay with that, then this is a game that I have because it doesn't take up a lot of room. Valley of the Kings is the most strategic deck building game that I have. Well, I don't have it anymore, but I've played this game a lot. Railroad Barons is in the 18xx family of games, which they have trains and they have shares. This is not a true 18xx game because it doesn't have any, you don't build any track, but I think this is an interesting way to teach people, introduce people to the share and rusting mechanics of 18xx. Sneaks and Snitches and Not Alone are 2 games where you have simultaneous action selection, so people are going to choose where they want to go, and you want to sort of outguess your opponents. In Sneaks and Snitches, you're playing everyone for themselves. In Not Alone, it's one versus many. So one person is playing the planet that's trying to kill a whole bunch of astronauts or simulate a bunch of astronauts. Carcassonne is another classic. It's 10 years younger than Catan, but it's got a lot of depth. It plays really well on... It plays really well asynchronously, and it does have a good mobile app. I personally like the South Seas version of Carcassonne. But yeah, it's like dominoes, but with meeples. Meeples being these wooden things that are kind of a symbol of the board game industry. Pentago is like Connect 4, except instead of gravity, you twist these boards. No Thanks and Quinto, they're very different games, but I put them on the same spot because I think they fit a similar role. No Thanks, you want to try and take the fewest cards, and it's like a golf score, but you have to take some cards, and so it's about choosing which ones. If you have the 20 and the 21, you only pay for the 20 because you pay for the lowest card in a set. Quinto is a roll and write, and I use this one at school a fair bit to teach probability. There's a lot of social deduction games, which to me often involve a lot of yelling at people, and not everyone is okay with lying. That's why I like Bang the Dice game, because I think it handles social deduction games the best. But there's a lot of other ones that are worth looking at. Secret Hitler, Two Rooms and a Boom, Werewolf, Mafia, and Resistance. I like Avalon as the better version of Resistance. Seven Wonders is the second board game I ever bought. I have a French copy that I'll probably never sell. There's a mobile app that I've never tried. It's a drafting game, so everyone gets 7 cards. You pick one, you pass them on. Then you get 6 cards that have been passed to you, and you pick one of those. At the end, you compare scores. Sushi Go is the easier version of this to teach, but Seven Wonders plays really well with 7 or with the expansion 8 people. It can be a little complex, so that's where I'm saying it's between those two. A friend of mine calls these red hexaflexagons, but anyway. Going, Gone is a real-time auction game. I don't really like auction games, but in this one you're just throwing cubes in cups, and that's, I think, a lot of fun. Zolkin is a heavy worker game, and Village is probably a little bit lighter than Zolkin. I don't own Zolkin, and I don't feel the need to own Zolkin, but I think I can recognize that it's a good game, and if I was going to play a worker placement game, this would definitely be one I'd consider. The other one I'd consider is Le Havre. I like Le Havre because it's got a great mobile app, and it's got accordion music on when you play it. I like the theme and the setting of Le Havre, but I can see that for a lot of people, Zolkin could be better. Also, I was excited when I went to Mexico and I saw the pyramids that are in Zolkin. Command and Colors is a series of games where you have armies that fit on hexagons, and you can only control some of them depending on the cards that you have. It's a pitch battle game, which a lot of people would think of, maybe say Warhammer 40k is an example of what I'd call a pitch battle game. I like Battle Law better, but Memoir 44 is simpler and therefore easier to teach. Arm & Ray is a strategic fixed placement auction, which means that you have an auction, but there's limited spots that you can get, and everyone's going to end up with something, which for me is a much better auction mechanic. I also really like the theme. Keyforge and Summoner Wars are 2 games that I think are best played on as the app, and they're both card games which you can play in person, but I think that they're both really good because they can be played asynchronously, which means that I can take my turn, and then an hour later my friend can take their turn, and over the course of maybe a couple of days we can play a game. Charterstone is a legacy worker placement game. So legacy means that you add stickers and the game is going to change from game to game, and you play maybe 10 or 12 games. Worker placement means that there's a set number of spots on the board, and once they're gone, they're gone. This would probably be my favorite worker placement game. So I have a couple of games which are competitive card games, where in all of these games you're trying to get your opponent's life down to 0 or something similar to that. Warhammer Invasion is the first game that got me into this style of games. I saw it on the bargain bin, and I said, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And I was a bit hesitant because I don't really like the Warhammer theme, but I just loved it. And it then got me into Netrunner, which then got me into the #1 game on this list. Legends of Runeterra is only available as an app. You can't play it as a physical board game, but I think that it's worth checking out. And if you want, the only one that you can actually buy anymore is called Ashes: Rise of the Phoenix Born, and I think it's notable because it just has amazing art. Some of the best art I've ever seen in a board game. They're all pretty complicated. So I mentioned deck builders earlier. So there's 3 deck builders that are all made by the same people, and I think they're all very, very good. Star Realms, you do try to get Star Realms and Heroes Realms. You're trying to get your opponent's life down to 0, which can be good. It makes the games fairly fast, but I kind of like how Ascension does it better. Not everyone loves Ascension's art, but I like it. And all Star Realms and Ascension both have good mobile apps. Pathfinder adventure card game is it kind of has the feel of D&D without the storytelling aspect. There's a little bit of setting, but there's not really as storytelling. Instead, I'd say it feels more like a puzzle. And you do have that experience aspect of D&D where you're going to get better weapons, you're going to get better equipment, that you roll the same sort of dice. And I think that it has an excellent mobile app, which I put on the TV and I play with. Well, I used to play with my daughter. So the last deck builders I think on this list, there's a series of games called Deck Building Game. And I call it DC Deck Builder because that was the first one, and I think it's probably still the best. And there's a lot of people out there who really like DC Comics. Though, if you like Street Fighter, which is probably what I would buy if I was going to buy it now, Naruto, Adventure Time, Attack on Titan, there's a whole bunch of different varieties. I like this one, and the reason why I have the DC Deck Builder is just because it's so easy to set up and it's so easy to play. And in the case of the DC Deck Builder, you're fighting against DC villains, and I think that makes for a good game. So in 49, I have 3 team-based games. These games are all kind of similar, and it's just a matter of which theme you like better. If you like dwarves and orcs playing football, then you'd like Blitz Brawl. Super Fantasy Brawl has a whole bunch of different, you have a team where you choose 3 champions and they all play very differently. And Legend of Korra, you have Pro Bending Arena, you have an Earthbender, a Firebender, and a Waterbender, and you're trying to knock the other person's team off the board. They all actually play quite differently. So Blitz Brawl uses dice. Legend of Korra has a deck building mechanic. But I think they all fit as a similar space. At the moment, Pro Bending Arena is the only one that I own, and but I could see that they're all very similar games, and they kind of fit in that 2-player problem where a lot of the time you're probably only going to want to play one of these 3 games. If you want a simple share trading game, then you could look at Spectaculum. If you wanted a simple share trading game with trains, then go for Mini Rails. I think Mini Rails is the better game, but I only own Spectaculum. Sushi Go Party is like Seven Wonders, except it's way easier to teach, and it has cute sushi. If you like Pathfinder Adventure card game, you could try out Warhammer Quest or Heroes of Terranoth. They're the same game, except that Warhammer Quest has a campaign aspect to it. Your character is going to get better over the course of 5 missions. Terranoth doesn't have that, but it has much better art. Navigator is another Rondel game, and this one also has shares. This one just doesn't have any armies. You're exploring instead and trading sugar and cocoa and gold. If you like trading, I mentioned earlier that like Catan, if you like the trading aspects of Catan, well, you could check out Chinatown, which is an intense trading game. Or Dragon's Gold. In Dragon's Gold, a team of warriors have taken down a dragon and they have to split up their gold. The thing is, you only have 1 minute to decide how you're going to split it up, and if you can't agree, then nobody gets anything. Hey, That's My Fish is a game of penguins on hexagons eating fish. It has a great mobile app, and there's a lot of strategy for a game that can be taught really quickly. Condottiere, which it was then featured as Gwent in the Witcher 3 video game, and now is a standalone video game with a fairly big community as a mobile game. It is also, I think it would be considered, it's a really interesting game with sort of bluffing and strategy, and I think worth checking out. Go is the oldest game on this list. It's also arguably the simplest game in that you put down stones on squares, and when you surround them, they disappear. That's it. That's the rules. But it takes a lifetime to master. It's a game that took longer for computers to beat than chess. And obviously you can play this online. I don't think it's the most difficult game on this list. I think the number 1 ranked game on this game is actually more difficult. But yeah, it's I stopped playing it because it just felt like too much like maths, but I'll definitely play other people if they offer it. Timeline is a game I liked enough that I made my own timeline set, and I made big versions of the cards that decorate the wall of my classroom. So there's a series of games called 4X games that stand for Explore, Expand, Exterminate, and Exploit. The most famous of which is TI4. It takes 12 hours. You're going to know whether or not that is going to appeal to you. Sidereal Confluence is a trading game. It's pretty mathsy, and it's really just whoever is going to be the most aggressive deal. It's kind of like Chinatown, but expanded out to the most extreme version. And then there's Trade on the Tigris, which I think is a more approachable version of that. And because there's hidden information, there's a possibility that that person who's offering you a really good deal might be doing it because, like in the game Old Maid, he or she's trading you a volcano eruption, which is going to destroy your civilization. Cash and Guns is a great party game for people who are okay with having a foam gun pointed at their face. The simplest 18xx game is 18 Lilliput. Normally an 18xx games use hexagons. Lilliput doesn't. It's the simplest. It plays very differently to a standard 18xx game, and it does have an option to be played solo. So, I mentioned with Oceanus that I don't own that. Instead, I own Dreamhome. I just think that I like the theme of Dreamhome a little bit more, and I just find that it's a little bit easier to teach new players. But I think they're both very good games. I just rather play Dreamhome. Mex Versus Minion is another game. It has program movement, which Board Game Geek would call action queue. The idea is you set up your 4 different actions, and then they play out, and unfortunately something is going to interrupt that queue, and it's all going to go haywire. But I think this is a fun game that you play cooperatively. It's part of a campaign, so you're going to play over 10, I think it's 10 missions. Presumably everyone watching this video has some opinion already of chess, so I'm probably not going to change your mind on that. Ticket to Ride is the first game that I ever bought. After I played Catan, I went out and I looked for a game, and I thought, this one looks good, it's got trains on it. I bought the Europe version, which is okay. It has randomness, but I generally think that the original one is the better game. It's the more balanced game. But if you know the cities in Europe better than you know the cities in America, then go for whichever one you like. There's also mini versions of the game. So there's New York is the one I own, but they've since made London and Amsterdam, and I'll probably buy Paris if they ever release that. There's a whole bunch of map expansions. The one I would recommend is Pennsylvania because it has shares and the city of Scranton. But I would... the reason I like it is because normally a winning strategy in Ticket to Ride is just hold a whole bunch of cards. And like just keep drawing cards until you've got the most cards and then just go off. Whereas Pennsylvania kind of balances that. I think the African expansion also balances that, but I haven't played that one. This is, I think, the most successful board... well, I'm going to talk about the most successful board game in a second, but this is a very, very, very successful board game. There's a huge number of copies sold. The mobile app is really good, and... yeah, I think it's a great starting place for people who are new to board games. Ethnos is another great starting place. It's a little bit more complicated than Ticket to Ride. It has push your luck in that you want to hold on with your cards for as long as possible, but then say, okay, no, this is too much. I need to play them now while I can. It has area majority, which is a game mechanic that I really like. And I'll talk about that more later as we get to another game on this list, El Grande. And yeah, I just think that because it has all of these different races, it has heaps and heaps of replayability because you're going to mix and match different races, and it's going to play out. The different strategies will be the better plan each time. Ave Caesar is an actual racing game. It's one of the simplest games I own. You can teach it to anyone, but there's actually interesting choices in the game, and it's just a lot of fun to play. Star Wars Imperial Assault is a tactical minis game. I said that Rebellion feels like Star Wars the game. In terms of an individual scene, then Imperial Assault is Star Wars the game. You play as the Rebels, and one person plays again as the Empire. I actually really like playing as the Empire. I would choose to play as the Empire. But if you don't have someone who wants to play the Empire, then you can use a mobile app. And there's a whole community on the internet of people who, once you run out of games to play on the mobile app, that there's hundreds of games that you can play with sets of cards. The next game is Dice Town. I've called this Yahtzee mixed with poker in the Old West. You have poker dice and you, or they're card game dice, and you roll them to try and get the best sets. And I like the art, I like the theme. I haven't played it recently, but I'm looking forward to playing it again soon. Dixit is probably the easiest party game that I have. I can teach it as you play. It has beautiful art, and it can be a funny experience. So I own 7 expansions to Dixit. If you're going to buy one, I recommend buying Dixit Journey. If you can't buy the big box, if all you can buy is the original game, instead what I'd say is buy any of the other expansions and download a board online. So that way you're going to see different cards to the cards that everyone else has. Glory to Rome, you can't buy anymore unless you speak French, German, or Polish, or you can make these pirate cards that I have here. You can buy the Black Box edition online, like on eBay, for hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but it's a great game. The criticism is that the cards are overpowered, but everything is overpowered, and so when everything is overpowered, it kind of balances out. If you like the idea of that and you can't get a hold of Glory to Rome, then you should check out Export Import, which is a modern version of that game. It has a lot more depth to it as well, because there's such a variety of cards. So it's going to take you a lot longer to really learn all the strategies in Export Import. I would say Glory to Rome is a very similar, Race for the Galaxy is a very similar game, but they are different. And Snowtails is another racing game, and I like this game because you really feel like you're racing, and part of that is because it's pretty easy for your sled to crash into a tree. And usually when I teach this game, I explain how it works, and then within 5 minutes someone has crashed into a tree, and I say, okay, now that we know how hard it is to actually race these sleds, now let's restart and we'll take it again. So I mentioned 18xx games before. There are a lot of 18xx games. The one that I'm recommending is 18CZ. It's set in the Czech Republic, and I've chosen that one because it's probably the best one for 2 or 3 players. You can play all of these online. There's a community of people where you can play them online, but I don't. So King Domino is probably the easiest game I have to teach to new people. You are going to choose tiles and then build a little kingdom. And TK2 is the last Rundell game on this. It feels like to me a combination of Risk and the video game Civilization. You're going to build up your ancient empire. You're going to have a tech tree where you're going to build temples, and there's lots of different ways of winning. I like the Rundell mechanic because it means that the game plays really, really fastly. It's a very fast game. Okay, and there are armies, but generally you're not going to get beaten up too much, which is also nice. If you like King Domino, but you're ready for something a little bit meatier, then Azul is the game for you. Well, some people love the art, these tiles. Some people hate those tiles. I personally love those tiles, and I think Azul is probably my favorite mid-weight game. We'll see how that goes. Space Cadets Dice Duel is a real-time game, just like Captain Sonar, where you have one ship and you're trying to destroy the other person's ship, except this time you're going to roll a whole bunch of dice, which... yeah, I think it makes for a really interesting game. At this point, I mean, everything from here on, these are all games that I own and I really like. So I'm going to try not to say that I think they're an interesting game. Vegas Showdown feels a lot like Amun-Re. The reason why Vegas Showdown is higher on the list is because it's so much easier to teach. And a lot of people like the theme of casinos. I put on Ocean's 11 or just generic Vegas music, and I really like the fixed-placed auction mechanic. Blackfeet is it's what they call a pick up and deliver game, where your ships are going to go and pick up cubes from one place and they're going to deliver them to another place to make money. while you're doing that, you also have a pirate ship that's going to try and shoot down other people's merchants and sink them. Now, normally that's the sort of thing that would make me a little bit worried because I don't like being attacked. But in this game, if you get being attacked as part of the game, everyone's going to get attacked all of the time, and your ship just comes back and you haven't really lost that much. It can be played as a green circle game if you take out the fortune cards. So it makes the game a little bit less exciting, but a lot easier to teach. Spot It is a game where you want to try and match the symbols on your card to the card in the center. So every card has exactly one symbol that matches. So here I have apples, here I have dolphins, here I have green spots. But every card has exactly one symbol that matches, which just mathematically I find amazing. Another game, Set, is similar, but way, way harder. So where in Spot It, it's sort of maybe a second before someone spots the symbol. In Set, it could take you 30 seconds or even a minute until you can find what the pattern is. And I don't own Set anymore because I don't know enough people who want to play that sort of game. But Spot It, everyone loves. Also called Double, you can also get a set of specific double cards with football teams or other sort of symbols on there. I've made my own set of Spot It as well. Jungle Speed is like Spot It, except that it's instead of just calling out the match, you're going to grab this totem. And this is a pretty wild game. It's a game where you have to take your rings off before you play, and it can get a bit violent. It also is a game where a lot of these cards look really, really similar when you're trying to spot things quickly, which makes for this fun moment of mistake. So Jungle Speed's probably pushing a blue, the limits of green circle. It's probably getting to blue square. But if you teach it in steps, there's a way that I teach it where I don't use these arrow cards until people know what's going on. Escape is like Space Cadets Dice Duel. I didn't write that in the comments, but it's a very similar kind of game. It's a real-time dice rolling game, so you're going to roll, everyone has 5 dice, and they're going to control their Indiana Jones type character who's trying to escape from this temple. And the problem is that if you roll a black face, you can't use that dice anymore until you unlock it. And you can get stuck in a room and have to ask for someone else to come and get you. And there is this moment where you realize that you're not going to get that person out, that your friend is stuck, they're not going to make it out of the temple. And then it's done in 10 minutes. There's an audio track that you should download off Board Game Geek that I think really adds to the experience. And then once you've played with that a couple of times, you should get the Yakety Sax version. They're also both on YouTube. Yomi is a fighting game. I really like fighting games, except that no one has really cracked no one's sold how to do fighting games well. Yomi is the one that does it best because it's the fastest. There is a mobile app, and it just has that paper, scissors, rock aspect of a game like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. K2 is a racing game. It's a bit of an odd racing game because you're racing up the world's most dangerous mountain, K2, and there is a good chance that one of your climbers is going to die on the mountain, and that is going to tell you whether or not this game is going to be for you. There is an easy version, but what's the point? El Grande is an area majority game, and I like area majority games, and El Grande is the original and still the best in my opinion. The idea is you don't want to come first in any one zone, you want to come second in every zone. That's really the winning tip to how to be good at El Grande. It doesn't look very exciting, but it makes up for it with excellent strategy. Camel Up is you're betting on a camel race, so you don't own any of the camels. You're predicting which one's going to win. And I think this is a great game for learning about probability, because you can say, well, I think that camel has a 1 in 3 chance of winning, but the betting odds aren't paying out that high, so I'm not going to bet on that camel. And yeah, it's great for big numbers. It's over pretty quickly. It can be simplified. I teach it with half the rules, and then I add in rules in the second game. Camel Up. Netrunner. Oh, I look at Netrunner sort of as a bittersweet thing. After I played Warhammer Invasion, I then discovered Netrunner, and it sort of got me starting playing competitive card games in stores. And boy, do I love Netrunner. I have played a lot of Netrunner, and it has an amazing theme. It has this cyberpunk theme. I love the bluffing aspect of it. There is a point where when you start really getting good at Netrunner, it all just becomes maths. But until that point, it's an incredible theme, and I really like the deck building aspect of you go in with your deck that you've planned and you've thought about, and you'll be washing your hair and you think, oh, what if I take out that card and put in this card? Unfortunately, Netrunner is no longer in print. You can play it online on jinteki.net, but I hope that it gets reprinted. The sad thing is I've moved on to the #1 game on this list, which is really just it's better designed than Netrunner. But I miss you, old friend. Okay, number 9 is Acquire. It's the original share game. It's from the 60s, and it's still the best. Well, not the best, but it's one of the best. It may be the highest ranked share game on this list. It doesn't have the depth of an 18xx game, but it's really easy to teach. Well, I mean, you've got to explain to people what's going on, but once they get it, people are going to... it's a fast game it's a fast game where you're trying to predict. It has a real feeling of trying to predict which share is going to grow. So if you can get the version of the game with plastic tiles, if you ever see that in a thrift shop, then definitely buy the one with the plastic tiles, because they're worth a fortune. There are 2 games that kind of feel a bit like role-playing games, except that you use an app to manage it for you, and they're Mansion of Madness and Journeys in Middle-earth. It depends on whether or not you like the idea of being a 1920s investigator who's trying to fight monsters, alien monsters, Lovecraftian horrors, but or if you like Lord of the Rings. You need a mobile app to play, but that's a good thing, not a bad thing, because it manages all of the bookkeeping for you and it tells the story, and they're great. But I like the Arkham Horror LCG card game even better, and the card game is it has all of that deck building, that deck selection where you choose what your investigator is going to have at the start of the game, and you upgrade between games. You get to add in, say, oh, I'm going to replace this card for that card, or a better version of this card now that I have some experience points. I think that it's a great co-op game. It's really the best version of the Pathfinder or Warhammer Quest adventure card games. It feels the same for me, and I really like that 1920s investigator theme. But if you don't, you could try out Marvel Champions. It's the same sort of game, except I haven't played Marvel Champions, but I have heard that it doesn't have as much strategy as Arkham Horror does. Race for the Galaxy is the best engine builder game on this list, and part of that is because it plays so quickly. A game can be played online in about 15 minutes, and in person in about 30 minutes once you know what you're doing. It can scare a lot of people off. There's a lot of scary icons on these cards, and it definitely takes a bit of learning. It really is right on the edge of Double Black Diamond in terms of complexity. But once you learn it, it's a game that is incredibly worthwhile in terms of its replayability. And Sentry is a way that you could build up if you wanted to. Sentry is much prettier and it's a lot easier to teach. But for me, I'd rather play Race for the Galaxy. Through the Ages is the best asynchronous game. This is the game that I play with my brother. We play it on our phones, and we just take 1 or 2 turns, maybe 3 or 4 turns a day. Playing it in person on a table, it really is a tough game to teach to people. The app does a really good job of explaining how to play, but even then, there are going to be people who aren't going to make it through that tutorial. There's an excellent iPhone app. There's an app and it's on pretty much everything. Number 4, and we're getting down to my favorite games, the game that I probably played more than any other game. I've spent more hours playing this game more than any other game, where maybe number 1 being the competitor, is Diplomacy. It requires 7 people to play Diplomacy, and it takes a 7-hour game would be a short game of Diplomacy. A long game could take 7 weeks. I only play on the Conspiracy app, which is only on Android these days. The game that I play is only on Android. I only play it on Conspiracy, but it has only ever been on Android. Yeah, it takes, even though the rules are very, very simple, there's a whole lot of gotchas where people don't realize, I didn't realize the rule played out like that. So I'd recommend you can play 2 and 3 player variants, and that's a good way to learn the rules before you get started. Or you just accept that the first 2 or 3 games you're gonna lose because there's a lot of strategy. It has the feel to me of Survivor World War One, in that you can't win without allies, but you also can't win without stabbing your allies at some point. In terms of fighting games, Bushido feels a bit different to games like Yomi in that it doesn't have exactly the paper scissors rock aspect. It does have action retrieval, and at the start of the game you're going to draft the different actions that your fighter is going to use, whether or not they're going to use aggressive styles of attack, or whether they're going to be evasive or tricksy, or they're just going to block a lot. And then you choose which weapon you're going to use, and you go up against your opponent. And you roll a lot of dice, but the dice, there's a lot of mitigation for the luck of the dice. And it's my number 3 game. My number 2 game is the reason why I don't own any other heavy games. Brass Birmingham is the only heavy game that I want to play. There's Brass, if people refer to Brass or the app that's available on iPhones and maybe on Androids, I'm not sure. That version, Brass Lancashire, is not as good. It's an okay way to learn the game, and that's fine, but it has some balance issues, whereas Brass Birmingham took an excellent game and then fixed it. And it's set in the Industrial Revolution. It's not necessarily the world's most exciting theme, and there are definitely elements that when you play it with people that they're going to realize, oh, I can't do that thing that I want, and they're going to have to reset their turn. But one of the reasons I really like it is it plays really well with 2 players and 3 players, which means if you just have one friend who wants to learn Brass, it feels really tight and competitive at 2 players. The term knife fight in a phone booth comes to mind, in that it's just, you really are trying to get in your friend's head and think about what are they going to do, and try and cut them off and look for their weaknesses. Yeah, I'm gushing because I really like Brass Birmingham. Or Just Magic, or often called MTG, is the most successful board game ever. It's got the most players, and it probably makes more money than all the other board games combined. If you go to a game store, there's a good chance that they stay in business thanks to Magic the Gathering. It's like Go. It's a game that, well, it's a lot more complicated to teach than Go, but it is relatively easy to teach. It's probably blue square in complexity. It's easier to learn than Netrunner, for instance, but it's incredibly difficult to master. There is, and I think it will take a long time before artificial intelligence can keep up with Magic the Gathering. So much so that you can't really play, there aren't really good AIs for Magic. You have to play against humans. And you can do that for free on Magic Arena, or you can test out decks on Cockatrice. And there's also Magic Online, which allows you to play different kinds of Magic. Magic is a lot of different games. So because it's been going for 25 years, or getting close to 30 years now, I think, and there's tens of thousands of cards, there's an incredible amount of variety in Magic. It's different games for different people. Probably one of the most popular formats these days is a fan-based format called Commander, or EDH, that I mentioned earlier. Theoretically, you could probably play a co-op version of Magic, because really it's just a set of tools. The cards are just a tool for you to play. One of the big criticisms is that it has a high amount of luck in the game, because you draw land cards, and if you don't draw them, or you draw too many, or you draw the wrong type, you can find yourself stuck without really anything to do. Now, again, I'm sure there's variants where you can get rid of that, but I think that the luck is a good thing. That's a little bit of a complicated idea to go into, but I think the luck is actually part of the reason why Magic has been so successful. The other thing to talk about with Magic is that it can be a very expensive game. There are cards that, because of the way the game is made, there are cards that can cost hundreds of dollars. And the upside of that means that there's a lot of money that's spent on designers. It has the best art of card games because they can afford to pay professional artists. They have full-time teams of designers who all they do every day is make make Magic. Whereas other board games, there'll be a designer who works on it for maybe a year, and then they get their friends to test it, and that's it. And you just hope that the game's okay. That said, because the way that Magic is sold, there's also thousands, or there's probably millions, if not billions, of Magic cards that nobody wants, except for me, because I have 10,000 cards in my cupboard that nobody wants. The cards that are given to me, cards that are pretty much worthless. And if you're willing to play with cards that are pretty much worthless, you can still have a really great time for a few dollars. If you go to a game store and you tell them you want to learn how to play Magic, they will have packs that are ready to give to new players, or they might be able to direct you to people who say, hey, does anyone know where I could spend $10 and get a few hundred Magic cards? If you know me personally, let me know, and I will give you a few hundred Magic cards. So at this point, I might talk about subscribers again, and say that, especially in the last 6 months, I have put a lot of work into making these videos, and I hope that they're worthwhile to people. Initially, it was just sort of a bit of a joke when I made that Kazoo Kid video, and over time, I found a few topics I didn't really like teaching, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to record a video so I only have to teach this once. Whereas now I like to think that there's kind of a resource for anyone who's struggling, that they can find what they need. Obviously, my videos are never going to have a very big target audience, and I don't think that monetization is a realistic possibility as much as people like to joke about it. And to be honest, unfortunately, there's not really a huge incentive for me to have more people other than my students discover these videos, because every new student who discovers these videos is someone who my students are going to be competing against. That said, I hope that they're worthwhile to the people who have watched them, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think I'll ever get to 1,000 subscribers. At this point, it's taken me 5 years to get to 100, so it will probably be 50 years before I can get to 1,000, and I'll be 88 and hopefully not making videos by then. But just this once, I'm going to say, be sure to like, and if you haven't already, subscribed, and thanks for watching, everyone.